Tomorrow is the feast day of St. Francis. Many churches of many different stripes, including Unitarian Universalist congregations, will be doing a blessing of the animals service this morning. It's an annual ritual where folks can bring their animals to their religious institution to receive a blessing for all the companionship and care and kindness they offer to us humans. It makes sense for folks to do this around Francis's day because he was renowned for his love of animals. You often see those sculptures with the birds just perched all over him. And so many of the stories in St. Bonaventure's biography of St. Francis feature animals, domestic and wild. I studied Francis and the aftermath of his 12th to 13th century movement for change. Francis was a reformer. He heard a call and had a vision of a different kind of Catholicism, one that focused on service, giving, compassion, simplicity, and on wandering. Though, as is often the case, his reform became institutionalized and took on trappings of organization that Francis would have balked at, the core of his message survives. His teachings were about faith and fellowship and journey and embodiment. Though the theology is very different, the deep heart of what he sought to give people isn't so very different from what we seek. A kind of hope in hard times, a community of support and care, a sense of wholeness and a life of service. Francis also understood something that religions the world over understand, and that's the value of ritual. Many of you may not realize this, but Francis is credited with creating the first Creche scene. In 1223, the story goes, he got permission from the local bigwigs to stage a nativity scene in a cave outside the town of Creche. A live ox and ass were in the cave, and Francis preached about the baby Jesus, so overcome with emotion that he found it hard to speak Jesus' name. The affective quality of the creche was so potent that it became an annual ritual. And of course, to this day, nativities as decorations in homes are a staple of Christmas time. What began as Francis's attempt to offer his contemporary Italians access to a deeper sense of immediacy in their relationship to the Christmas story. What began as a ritual of embodying a moment in the Christian story and asking his followers to be physically present to that moment as a community, experiencing emotion and love and depth together. What began that way has become for so many a sort of shorthand, maybe even calcified form of consuming experience from afar in the form of small figure-based nativities in the privacy of our own home. What was collective, emotional, and made physical demands is now too often individual, decorative material. I often get asked why, as a Unitarian Universalist, I devoted my doctoral work to medieval Christianity, and it's a fair question. While there are certainly layers of reasons, one prominent one is that the way ritual worked in the medieval period, intersecting with imagination and space and body and experience, was something of a mystery to me as a born and raised Unitarian Universalist. I had this sense as a UU in the 80s and 90s that we lacked participatory ritual. I had a sort of grass is greener feeling about incense and pomp and circumstance. I remember once at summer camp going on a Sunday morning to Mass with a handful of Catholic counselors in our otherwise very Jewish camp. I was craving something, right? The theology could not have been further from mine, but something to do with ritual, something about repeated movements and words designed to evoke something internal felt necessary to me. And that's really what ritual does. It takes our bodies and minds and works them in order to help us achieve something spiritual. Not for nothing, There are bodily movements repeated in the Mass: stand up, sit down, make the sign of the cross here or there. And there are the same words uttered over and over, day in and day out. The same smells of incense and the sight of candles lit, and so on. And we see that embodiment and repetition across religious and cultural experience. Ritual is ritual because it is repeated time and again by individuals or by a group. Devotion, the word for that in Hindi is puja. Devotion in Hindu traditions asks adherents to engage in familiar body movements over and over again. The use of positions and mantras in Buddhist meditation repeats experience over time. The vast array of ritual fasting and action in Judaism makes each year a cycle of celebration and mourning fully embodied in time and space. The 5 times a day daily ritual of prayer that is not just internal, but also done in body, as described in our poem this morning, does the same. Ritual participation is everywhere in human experience, and it takes many forms, from the routinely religious rituals that folks engage in over and over, to the once-in-a-lifetime rituals, like those that surround coming into adulthood in many cultures, weddings, baby blessings, and memorials. Whether repeated daily or weekly or once in a human's lifetime, rituals do a special kind of work in the human experience. In a piece published on Psychology Today, Rebecca J. Lester, a professor of anthropology, writes this: "One of the most important features of rituals is that they do not only mark time, they create time. By defining beginnings and endings to developmental or social phases, rituals structure our social worlds and how we understand time, relationships, and change." Lester is noting that rituals help to define our human context. They put us in the long line of ancestors who received that same tattoo when they came of age. Or they place us within a community of believers who all know the familiar motions and words. Or they mark a change in how we relate to our world by defining our relationships anew, or making meaning out of the moment we are living through. Lester describes some of the earliest observations by sociologists and anthropologists, Western white men who went to observe tribal groups in other parts of the world, went not to participate in, but to consume the rituals of others. The 2 figures that she mentions and that loom large in the early days of describing the nature of human ritual are Arnold von Genep and Victor Turner. What these 2 men saw when they spent time with folks for whom ritual is a focus of the lived experience was that ritual often involves a sort of time out of time. It involves a moment of moving outside the day-to-day in order to cultivate the sense of being beyond the time that rituals are marking and creating. The folks engaging in the ritual remain for a time outside in that in-between place, beyond the bounds of our normal existence, and that special space and time is known as liminal space, liminal time. The idea is that we have to go there, to that space and time unfettered by this space and time, in order to become something new, have something new happen to us. And then we can reintegrate back into our present moment with a better understanding of ourselves and the life we are living. This idea of liminality was observed very clearly in rituals of maturation and rituals of possession. But in truth, that liminal state in which a person can be truly changed, even if that change is fleeting, that's the goal of participatory ritual. Francis asked the people of Creche to walk up and enter a cave in the evening, moving their bodies and joining into the nativity scene. He wanted them for a moment to feel as though they were there at Jesus' side. He wanted them to leave their time and place and feel something newer and bigger for their God. Folks who engage regularly in participatory ritual describe achieving a state in which they are no longer fully on this plane, but have opened themselves to some other mind state and find that their whole view of existence can be altered. Now, certainly these kinds of mystical experiences can happen without set ritual. And certainly ritual can happen without achieving that liminal state and transformation. But that's actually kind of part of the point. We don't know when we might find ourselves beyond time and space, and we don't know when we might have our minds and hearts and spirits opened to some new way. But what we do know, and what humans have known for millennia, is that participatory ritual has the power to get us there. And it raises an important and somewhat challenging question. If ritual is meant to evoke a certain feeling and create a certain kind of state, allowing for movement along a spiritual journey, of what importance is the attitude with which we approach the ritual? Does the doing alone move us along? If I pray rote words with no feeling and no openness, will it have any effect? Or must I come with a certain openness of heart? I suppose there isn't a singular answer, but I can tell you from personal experience that it can work both ways. There have been days as a congregant and even days as a minister when I have woken up on a Sunday and thought, nope, don't want to go there and do that thing. I want to sleep, curl up under a cozy blanket, eat banana chocolate chip pancakes, hide from the world. But because I have a commitment to the community I am part of, that I help build, I force myself to go, and I find invariably that when I enter a sanctuary thick with generations of laughter and tears and love, and I sit and I hear the music and I take the deep breaths and I listen to that centering sound and I speak the words carefully chosen, and the rhythm of worship and ritual overtake me, it doesn't matter anymore that I wasn't in the mood, that I didn't approach these moments with the right frame of mind. In an almost Pavlovian way, the repeated ritual elements of our Sunday services take me there. And that's the point. Sunday after Sunday, we cultivate an experience together, and the more present we are, the more affected we are. And the more our journey goes on, and the deeper we are able to go within ourselves to find the truths hidden there in plain sight, and to come out at the end of our hour together renewed and with a different perspective on life. We know that many of us, like me in my early years, fret about our lack of elaborate ritual. But also many of us fret about any ritual that creeps in, fearing it will bring us back into theological dogma. And still many of us have knee-jerk reactions to the mere idea of ritual because someone in our history forced us to engage in rituals that harmed us or that felt inauthentic. And still many of us, I think, misunderstand what ritual does and why, imagining that engaging in ritual is following like a lemming off the cliff of individuality and into the valley of sheep. We Unitarian Universalists are a varied people, and our responses to ritual are varied, but our desire to leave it aside or pretend we don't engage in it leaves us, I think, at a disadvantage. Millennia of humans have understood the value of ritual, and it is perhaps the height of hubris to think that we have moved beyond a need for it. I had a professor of Judaism that spoke to exactly this question of approach and attitude, noting that in Judaism, the ritual matters, and so one does it even if one doesn't feel like it or doesn't feel the deep feeling one is supposed to feel in the moment. The act of the doing can bring you along, and so the thing itself, doing the thing, becomes primary. The action which engages the body and memory and imagination carries us along. I've thought a lot about how so often we view Judaism and Islam and many of the non-monotheistic traditions, and maybe even Catholicism, certainly medieval Catholicism, as religions of ritual, but we view Protestant Christianity as a religion of faith. The Protestant abandonment of many of the sacraments as practiced by Catholics contributes to this almost self-righteous notion that we don't need the trappings of ritual, and certainly not collective actions like prayer or fasting or feasting, because we can do the work of faith entirely in our minds as individuals. There's a fundamental kind of embodiment in early Christianity, born from the foundational theology that God took on bodily form. And the Protestant Reformation moved us away from embodied theology and embodied action, the kneeling and the standing and the sign of the cross and the belief in transubstantiation. We can find the origin, I think, of our complicated Unitarian Universalist relationship to ritual here. Because although we don't identify as Christian now as a denomination, we are inheritors of those heresies that birthed the Protestant Reformation and erased so much of the embodiment of Catholicism and other earlier forms of religious experience. But we risk so much when we see ourselves beyond ritual. In an article in Scientific American titled "Why Rituals Work," Francesca Gino and Michael Norton write, "Recent research suggests that rituals may be more rational than they appear. Why? Because even simple rituals can be extremely effective. Rituals performed after experiencing losses, from loved ones to lotteries, do alleviate grief. And rituals performed before high-pressure tasks, like singing in public, do in fact reduce anxiety and increase people's confidence. What's more, rituals appear to benefit even people who claim not to believe that rituals work. While anthropologists have documented rituals across cultures, the earlier research has been primarily observational. Recently, a series of investigations by psychologists have revealed intriguing new results demonstrating that rituals can have a causal impact on people's thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. We found that people who wrote about engaging in a ritual reported feeling less grief than those who only wrote about the loss itself." Van Genep and Turner observed other cultures, but researchers like Gino and Norton are working to establish how, in any culture, embodied ritual can, even if the person engaging in it is skeptical, have a positive impact. We humans need to mark time, make meaning from experience. And we are whole beings, soul, mind, heart, and body. We so badly want to think that we can think our way out of fear and pain. But when we do this, we contribute to the centuries-long attempt by Protestant Western culture, encouraged by a vision of consumptive capitalism that profits from our human bodies and asks us to be content with a freedom and liberty of mind alone, to split our souls and our bodies. That may be among the worst of the shadow sides of the Protestant Reformation, the pitting of our body and emotions against our rational mind and intellect, the pitting of our sense of individual independence against the cultivation of communities of mutual care and support. We are in a swing back, I think, both within Unitarian Universalism and hopefully within our culture at large. The rallying cry I hear now is one of wholeness and healing. It's a backlash that says out in the world, I'm a whole person and entitled to my body's autonomy and safety, as well as the autonomy of my mind and heart. And within our tradition, it's a backlash that says ritual action that involves the movement of our bodies and that engages those muscles of marking time and training our spirits matters. It has meant that in ministerial conversations among colleagues, we talk about ways to engage all the senses in Sunday morning services, offering more than a college lecture sermon surrounded by throwaway elements. It's why it matters so much to me that the entirety of a service holds together, that the music, the visuals, the words, the rituals relate. Because you are more than your right brain listening to me talk about anthropologists and scientific studies. It's why even though we don't talk about it as ritual most of the time, we do indeed engage in ritual. Our chalice lighting, both the physical act of igniting the flame, which involves sound and smell, and the act of speaking those words in unison, is the ritual use of one of our singular symbols of Unitarian Universalism. The centering sound is a ritual we do each Sunday that asks you to engage your body and to regulate your breathing and heartbeat so that your mind can open more fully to this time together. The offering is a ritual that demands a physical act, but also an act of spirit and compassion and generosity, exercising the muscles of a value-driven use of our money. Our time for meditation and prayer is created and offered every Sunday in order to encourage you to quiet your body and mind so that you can hold in your being a love for all the vast complication of life and for the vastness of creation. You may have noticed that I always ask you to come into a moment that is both physical and spiritual when it comes to that point of the service. All of these rituals are designed to ask for your participation in coming to a place of bodily, mental, and spiritual receptivity. All of them are designed to cultivate time out of time every single week, in theory, allowing you to hear more deeply the message when it comes. Altogether, the rituals of Sunday allow you to move forward in your spiritual journey and allow us together as a community to deepen our conversation. And ultimately, ideally, this makes all of us more ready for the challenges and joys we will face in our lives. It turns out that beyond the rituals embedded in each Sunday morning, we have a liturgical year, a year filled with rituals, even if we don't frame it that way, from ingathering with the water ceremony through to the flower ceremony in the spring. And these rituals are participatory. They're not for consumption, but for engagement. They are meant to align your body, heart, mind, and spirit through cycles of repeated and familiar action. Ritual matters. And it doesn't only matter in times of crisis and rejoicing, it matters week in and week out, day in and day out, because it is the building up of whole self muscles that then sustain us. If we practice all the time what it looks like to move outside of normal time, then when life forces us to, during grief and loss or during joy and triumph, we are better equipped to enter that liminal space we can't avoid and then find our way back. Our journey becomes easier when we practice participating in our own lives through embodied ritual based in community. And so rituals are the first part of our toolkit stuffed in our bag this October to make the journey before us less unfamiliar and less scary.